Let's go. You lead the way. Where are we headed? Towards a net zero future, of course. Cleaner water, more electricity, a sustainable society. That's the destination we've set ourselves. This we know. Yes, we know exactly where we're going, but we need to get there quicker. So, let's build on the progress we've already made by working and walking together. With the right partners, tools and ideas, we'll become an unstoppable force. This we know. Right now, there are businesses who are putting technology and sustainability at the heart of everything they do. Brave leaders turning maybes into realities and building something better for everyone. Now is the time to look to the future and reinvent ourselves today, empowering others to do the same tomorrow. Yes, we know what the future holds, and we know how to get there. So, let's take charge of the journey today.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Louise James from Accenture, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to this panel discussion on inclusive green jobs. Welcome to all of you here in person. It's fantastic to see you, and a massive welcome to our virtual audience, including those that have joined us from the Business Fights Poverty online community. The objective of this session is to really leave you in your mind with the changes that we all need to be making to ensure that we have an inclusive transition to green jobs. Before we actually introduce our panel, we're going to hear a video which will set some context about what we actually mean about inclusive green jobs, and also to hear from some youth leaders around the world about their hopes for a green transition.
The world wants and needs a more sustainable future. That means we must make an inclusive transition to green jobs as soon as possible. Green jobs are not just about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. They're also about reducing waste and pollution, as well as protecting and restoring our natural ecosystems. Listen to these youth leaders from around the world to hear their perspective on a just transition to a green economy. You'll hear their hopes and concerns about a more inclusive approach to green jobs.
Green jobs will enable us to produce products and provide services that benefit the environment.
Now, green jobs ensure that, along with reducing greenhouse gas emissions, they also provide employment that can enable social upliftment. With social upliftment, there will be awareness and the right knowledge among people.
Green Job must tackle climate change by providing support for local companies and fields, promoting the creation of renewable energy and sustainable transport, and by creating jobs that generate such environmental justice.
95% of the newly created green jobs are forecast to be in 6 sectors, namely in transport, energy, agriculture and forestry, construction, water and waste management, and industrial manufacturing. We estimate that over 50% of green job creation will not require a university degree in emerging markets, helping millions of people to overcome poverty while contributing to a sustainable future. But what do we mean by an inclusive transition? Firstly, it means including everyone.
To achieve the transition to a green economy, we as society have to work across sectors and generations.
Global leaders can also engage youth and women in green entrepreneurship, jobs as well as green business stimulation.
We need to collectively and consciously focus on addressing these biases on this journey towards a greener future so that no one is left behind. It also means thinking about workers in highly disrupted sectors that might need reskilling, or supporting millions of smallholder farmers in developing countries to shift from animal to plant-based farming with more sustainable land and water usage. Secondly, it means providing decent jobs. The International Labour Organization defines decent jobs as requiring adequate pay, safe working conditions, and respect for workers' rights. Governments, businesses and NGOs all have a role to play to ensuring the most underrepresented communities are not excluded and improving working conditions to empower those contributing to green jobs.
At Accenture, we've made sustainability our top responsibility. We believe it will be the most powerful force of change in our generation. Accenture Development Partnerships draws on Accenture's global capabilities and experience to address complex societal issues. Many of our clients serve or have supply chains in developing markets, so we see firsthand the importance of enabling green jobs in these communities.
Together with the partners in our ecosystem, we're preparing for the future of work, a future that meets the needs and the expectations of the next generation. We invite all of our corporate and public sector clients, our non-profit and alliance partners, our suppliers and our people to join us in the green jobs transition and to ensure that that is an inclusive transition.
These changes won't happen overnight, but urgent action is needed to incorporate these features by design for a just transition.
And this is my message to the young people. You're not too small to make a change. Your individual action is what will save our generation and the coming generation from the climate breakdown.
Contribute to the radical transformation that is urgently needed through individual actor actions, but above all by promoting and demanding a systemic transformation from political and economic actors.
Our aim is to not just have a healthy planet, but a healthy planet where people are living.
Join us in this journey and conversation towards an inclusive green transition.
I'd like to welcome the panel to come and join me on stage. And whilst they're doing that, just to say a massive thank you to Herbert, Ayantika and Pamela for sharing their perspective. Come and grab a seat. So we have 3 in-person panellists and we have a virtual panellist, Peter. So I'm going to start by briefly introducing the fantastic panel that we have. And hello, Peter, I can see you there. Let me start off with Peter. So Peter Nyeko is the CEO of Mandulis Energy. And Mandulis is a company in Uganda focused on deploying and developing clean tech. A huge welcome to you, Peter. Here on my right, I have Laura Kelly, who's a director at IIED, which is a policy and action research-focused organisation focused on sustainable development. And then Karin Reiter, who is the head of ESG and sustainability at the talent advisory and solutions company, the Adecco Group. And last but by no means least, Anita Thiessen, the CEO of Youth Business International, who's a network of organisations focused on youth entrepreneurship. So Anita, let me start with you. We've heard from youth leaders in that video who really are, and we've heard that so much over the last 10 days here in Glasgow, it will be the youth that will be leading this shift, right, towards businesses and enterprises that focus on social and green outcomes. But if you are a youth leader, what is it that they need from what you're seeing to really help their enterprises get off the ground?
Yeah, so we've been doing some work explicitly in the last couple of years to support, as it were, our type of entrepreneur, young, very often disadvantaged in emerging economies, to develop social and green businesses. And I think the number one challenge and the number one area they need support is how do you balance purpose and profit? Because these are businesses that are trying to do something green or social. And there's all sorts of dimensions to that, which is what is your legal structure to fulfill your purpose? How do you define and actually achieve and measure your impact and the different nature of financing? So there's a bunch of things that flow from how am I thinking differently about what my business is ultimately about, but it's still a business. And in line with what we do, throughout our network is really connecting those entrepreneurs into a wider ecosystem, because particularly if they're doing something innovative that hasn't yet been fully proven, a little bit different, you might need more patient capital, you might need to create the market for the product and so forth. So a lot of support to kind of connect with others, within that. And then always remember, back to what the video said, is that this has to work for people as well as for the planet. So it still has to be about job creation and good job creation. And Herbert, who was speaking, he's been supported by one of our members in Uganda. He focuses on a very specific rural initiative about creating biogas to get rid of dirty fuels and whatnot. So you can have big clean energy, but you can also have local clean energy. And I think it's the combination of those two which is really going to help drive change.
Well, that is a perfect transition to Peter. So Peter, to come to you, You are a great example of an entrepreneur who has set up this fantastic business in Uganda. And it would be great, just for the benefit of the audience, if you could explain very briefly your business model and maybe what was the main challenge you had to overcome to set up the company.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I hope you can all hear me clearly from Uganda. Yeah, so I'm Peter Nyeko at Mandulis Energy. We set up almost a decade ago now, looking at the issue of lack of access to electricity in rural areas, especially for rural farming communities who, without electricity, can't add value to their crops. And so we realized that if we could link waste from agricultural processing to electricity generation, we'd be able to solve two problems at the same time. And so that's what we have been doing, using rice husks, maize cobs, groundnut shells to produce electricity and clean cooking fuel in rural Uganda. And we're able to produce affordable off-grid electricity at the same price as grid electricity for industries as well as households as well. And so that's been quite exciting. We're now developing a 20 megawatt project and about 20 projects at about half megawatts each across Uganda, working with over 120,000 rural farming households in both Ugandan host communities as well as refugee communities across the country. And obviously, financing was one challenge at the beginning, but what has helped us a lot has been having access to climate financing, especially carbon offset platform, which has really made a difference to how we finance our work.
Great, thanks, Peter. And Laura, if I could turn to you. There's a real chance, right, that the green transition actually increases inequality than decreases it. So what should we be doing and thinking about to ensure that that doesn't happen?
So I think some of the things we've just heard about are really important, including people and thinking about the implications for them, for their jobs, and ensuring that jobs are decent. But also, I think for big companies, it's looking along the whole supply chain. So the sort of green transition example that's always pulled out is coal in South Africa. 90% of South Africa's energy comes from coal. It is an employer of not just South Africans, but migrant workers from across the region and the communities around the coal mines. Women provide food, there are other services, the whole sort of supply chain has an impact. So if you say, right, we're going to clean up South Africa's coal, which actually was a commitment last week. So I think the US, Europe and the UK have committed something like $8 billion. Eskom, the company, is in debt by $26 billion, so it does show the scale of the challenge. But actually thinking about not just investing that money in new green energy and retraining workers, but actually thinking about the implications of changing the sector on the people down the supply chain and the people in the communities around the mines. That's really quite important. And it might not just be the communities next to the mines, it might be the communities that the workers are coming from in Zimbabwe or Zambia. So it's actually quite a big issue. So that's at the bigger level. But as I think we've been hearing at the local level, it's also thinking about what the positive opportunities might be from green energy. Great example of agricultural biomass being used. How do you set up local collection schemes? How can you actually bring in more people than the traditional energy production would access? So I think that those are the sorts of things to be thinking about.
Yeah, and I know that Peter has a great example, which maybe we'll come on to, about how you can expand the livelihood opportunities, thinking about using every single part of the biomass and the biomass residue. Karen, to come to you, I mean, Laura mentioned about putting people at the heart. Adecco's done a lot of research on the skills agenda for the green economy, but I know one of the things you've picked up is a bit of scepticism, I guess, in terms of how this is being communicated. So what should businesses and governments be doing to address that?
I think first and foremost, businesses really need to build trust in the green transition, because without the understanding, the engagement and the commitment of workers, we really won't be able to make it a smooth transition and ensure that nobody is being left behind. So businesses need to foster a culture of transparency and really openly communicate how they are responding to the challenges presented by the green transition, what will be the impact on skills and employment, and then also, why they prioritize certain solutions over others. In the end, it serves everybody's needs, right? It enables companies to start building the skills that they need and retain really important knowledge, but it also empowers workers to really own their own skill sets and their career prospects. So to what you said, it's really about taking a human-centric approach to the green transition and ensuring that we don't treat workers as commodities, but really as people.
Yeah, and I know the skills agenda is so critical. It's something that we at Accenture have focused on a lot, and you yourself have as well at the Adecco Group. What about we'll come on to the types of skills in a minute, but what about the investment in skills? I know that's something you feel quite passionately about, so go.
Absolutely. I think it's, we hear a lot about investments in new technologies, investment in infrastructure, but we don't really talk about investment in people. And we believe that people are not just the cause of climate change, but really should be at the heart of the solutions. So companies need to prioritize investments and focus more on protecting the employability of workers rather than protecting jobs. And I think as they invest in the development, they should offer a really broad range of training and development solutions, particularly with a focus on work-based learning opportunities, whether it's apprenticeships or internships or other opportunities, because those are really the ones that enable better access to the world of work, particularly for underrepresented groups. And you might be needing to take very targeted approach to some underrepresented groups or those that are most affected by the transition. If you look at older workers that tend to be in more unsustainable industries or jobs, or it's women that still are underrepresented from a technical or digital skills perspective. And then to what I said before, it's really about stepping up as an employer and taking a more proactive approach to educating your employees about the skills that they will need going forward, and then also linking that to the opportunities that are available. So essentially, it's applying the principles of circularity to employment and moving away from that really devastating fire and hire approach to really investing in the long-term and lifelong sustainability of employability of people.
Great, thanks, Karen. And Anita, if we think about the types of skills, if Karen sorts out the investment challenge, which I know is...
we'll talk later.
Yeah, exactly. If she gave you all the money in the world, what would be the types of skills that you would be believing we really should be building to help this transition?
Yeah. And I think this conversation is obviously happening in a emerging from COVID world. So I think our learnings are kind of dovetailing. So again, if I go back to my profit and purpose point, that for young entrepreneurs, these are still businesses that they're setting up, and there's still a core set of business skills that you need. Everything from the nuts and bolts of cash management and HR and so forth to business plan and whatnot. So that doesn't go away. But I think what we're seeing is a much greater emphasis on a particular type of hard skill, and that's in the digital arena, regardless of what your business is. But also much, much greater emphasis on your personal skills and qualities. And I think even if you're starting off as a sole trader, micro-entrepreneur, or you're leading a big business, it's about having emotional resilience for all the ups and downs, really embedding some of those characteristics of what we would call responsible leadership, which is, what is your business actually for? Who is it for? How are you wanting to make a difference? How are you wanting to take your employees and so forth with you? So I think there's a lot about who you are as the person who's setting up the business, as well as the practical skills that you need to get it from A to B. And I think that will apply to whether you're setting up your own business, whether you transition into an established company or go back and forth between the two. I think it's those capabilities, and particularly in young people, that I think are really going to unleash really creative and powerful businesses into the future.
Absolutely. And Peter, if I could come to you on your experience in Uganda, how apprenticeships, learnerships, and other experience-based skilling, are you finding the talent that you need locally, or what challenges are you facing?
It's been really interesting, especially with the pandemic this past two years. Previously, we had interns from all across the globe who would come from different universities to work alongside our Ugandan, staff and students. But we had to go online so much in the last 2 years, and we had to find skill sets in the villages where we're working because people couldn't travel out of those villages. What was quite exciting was we were able to find people who work in the villages and get the transferable skills to retrain them into biomass engineers and solar technicians. So it's definitely very interesting from that point of view. But something else which has been really interesting is when you involve the whole community in the design process, you'll always discover that people you would least expect, grandmothers, might actually be able to lead the leap to, the new green jobs and getting on those skill sets. So from designing a new stove that we designed, from designing a new briquette machine, because we couldn't import one from overseas because, there was no ships moving. We were able to design and build a factory in country, design and build new stoves, working with the community. And it kind of led us to a new way of doing things that we're really excited about. So there is definitely hope in the midst of, doldrums.
Yeah, and it's a great point about really looking for the hidden workers, right? Who's out there who wants to be in the workforce, but we don't necessarily assume, that they want to be part of it, but they just need some support or they need to know about the opportunities. Laura, if I could come to you on digital skills. Karen mentioned it briefly. We've seen, obviously, during COVID, the actually huge potential for digital skills, but also challenges. And again, we've seen all around the world the challenge of the digital divide. So how do we make sure that we actually leverage digital in a very positive way to help this inclusive transition?
Well, actually, perhaps that's the silver lining of the COVID cloud, that we have actually been able to use digital in the way that we have during the pandemic. And I know we've got a lot of people joining here online from all over the world. Think about our carbon footprint if we'd have all come here to Glasgow by plane. I came by train, so that's okay. I think the big issue with digital, though, is actually the gender divide again. So we did some work at IIED, actually out of our work supporting some of the poorest countries in the climate negotiations, looking at how they were able to cope. And, of course, what we found was that even people working in government didn't have, access. They didn't have internet in their homes. There were people having to join climate negotiations in an internet cafe. And, actually getting information, getting the documents, they didn't have smartphones. So actually giving people access to both the internet and the technology is really important. But when you start looking at the costs, so the organisation GSMA, who's the sort of Manufacturers Association of mobile providers, they've done some work that shows that just 1 gigabyte of data in somewhere like Malawi, it costs $27. In the US, it costs $8. But interestingly, in Kenya, it costs about $1.08. So it can be done, but you need to have the investment and you need to think about how you sort of spur that inclusivity. Again, mobile phones costs, the average worker across Africa, they have to work for between 100 and 200 days to earn just as much for the basic smartphone. So that's something that also you need to think about addressing. And it's the same sorts of exclusions that happen. Women don't have access to technology, women don't necessarily get access to finance. We're potentially in danger of transferring that inequality into an online inequality. So we need to think about the ways that we can address that and really target things towards women entrepreneurs, women policymakers.
Yeah, and I think also the accessibility of tech more broadly from persons with disabilities. Anita?
Yeah, if I could jump in. I mean, I absolutely agree with everything you say, and I think it's very easy to make, we all have our own challenges every now and then with connectivity. It's very easy to make assumptions about what it's like, for others. But also, a part of our COVID responses, not only were we partnered with Accenture, but also with Google across 30 countries. And part of that was the digital skills for entrepreneurs. And I think one of the things we found is that women were more likely than men to not have the confidence at the outset to do things, just to think it's not for me and whatnot, but they had no choice. But through really practical training, from the basics up to more sophisticated, really understood, actually, I can do this. I know how to do this. I now have the appetite to do more. And there's a real request now for more sophisticated upskilling and so forth. So I think it's the confidence barrier that partly can be broken through, really patient and practical upskilling, along with kind of a lot of the infrastructure challenges. So I think, every challenge, is the flip side of an opportunity, I guess.
And you mentioned partnerships, Anita, and I just want to touch on that briefly with the panellists, because we're all working in partnerships in different ways, and I know you have with your Social and Green Impact Accelerator. To you, what have the different partners brought to the table that YBI could not have done on its own?
Yeah, I'll look at two types of partnerships. So within our network, where all our country-level members are independent and have a slightly different approach, although they're consistently focused on young entrepreneurs, is that we can learn across different countries. In this case, it was Kenya, the Netherlands, and the US, very different markets. Try to really understand what are the same things we need to do and what's different. Mentors need a slightly different approach. that people with green businesses have a higher level of impact measurement than those with other social businesses. So just to get that learning at a small level, test it at a wider level, and then you get a model which is scalable and appropriate, in our case, to young entrepreneurs, who are just at that early startup stage. And that's really at the heart of what we do as a network, is really wanting to test, learn, and expand that learning. But then if you look at partnerships, outside of our network and, with organizations like we have here, is I think we've all got that same intention. We'll have different takes on what we can do. And there will be unexpected opportunities where we can work together. But obviously, big challenges, need big collaborations, which are never easy. But I think you have the potential to identify bigger opportunities to make a difference in ways that maybe you hadn't expected from the outset. And ultimately, it's that kind of groundswell that is going to help us make the big shift that we need.
Yeah, and Peter, you're working with many different partners in Uganda, USA, the EU, Diageo, Coca-Cola. Again, what is the value of those partnerships to you?
Awesome. It's great working with partners, even such as Accenture on the project development side. Going on to the UNHCR, for access to refugee communities where we can, create that impact. Once refugee farmers grow crops, partnerships with people like Diageo who are able to purchase those crops from them, people like Coca-Cola, once the crops have been value added. And when we use electricity generated from biomass gasification, we have biochar left over. When the mothers cook with the clean cook stoves that give off biochar, we collect all that and sell all that to another big partner, which is Lafarge Holcim, that uses that biochar as a coal replacement in their cement plants. And you find you're suddenly connecting big, massive Fortune 500 size companies to smallholders in rural areas. And that link is really interesting from that point of view. When it comes to training, the FAO comes in quite interesting. And, it takes everyone doing what they do best, working together to make a difference to those who need us the most.
Great, thanks, Peter. And Laura, you've also been working on the Energy Change Lab in Tanzania. Are you bringing in lots of different partners to that? And again, what do you see as the true benefit of bringing in the different stakeholders?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting talking about how you can learn from partnerships. And, as you were just saying, thinking about unusual partnerships. So the Energy Change Lab was established back in 2015 with the idea of looking at improving access to energy for rural communities in Tanzania. So that was the sort of overarching objective. But actually, once they started talking to the communities about the issues that they were facing, some unusual sort of initiatives came up. So the accountability for energy supply. So energy is coming from somewhere, but actually small businesses were not able to meet orders because they were having energy supply problems. How do you actually get people together to address that? Because you write to the energy supply company and nothing comes back. So the Change Lab facilitated dialogue sessions between households, small businesses, energy suppliers, but also mini-grid developers. So, people I'm sure that, Peter knows well. To think about what were the challenges. And what was decided was that people using energy wanted to monitor their energy use. So devices were provided that could look at energy outages that could be used to identify when problems were happening. And then IID came along to collect that data, which was then amalgamated and shared with the energy companies. And what it showed was that people were paying for energy that they weren't getting. So you got consumer power coming in. And I think that's the other thing. Perhaps we'll touch on this later. We all have a role as consumers in sort of green transition and green jobs. So that was one aspect of the lab's work. It was interesting, though, digital was quite significant in that because you needed digital access to collect the data to get it sent to the researchers. And then also thinking about new models. How could you bring in some of those grandmothers or those people who wouldn't normally be thinking about access to energy, but people who might be providing food, women, street vendors, they were wanting to move away from wood stoves to solar-powered stoves. What kind of solar-powered stoves would work for them? Bringing them on board in the development process really helped to come up with a technology that was appropriate and useful.
Great. And Karen, just to come to you around businesses collaborating, right? Because we talk about cross-industry. cross-sector collaborating, which is sometimes easier potentially than businesses collaborating with each other. So how do you think businesses should sort of balance the competition versus collaboration angle?
I think when it comes to skilling, there doesn't need to be a trade-off between, building your own organization and competition, so differentiation and competition, because it's in everybody's interest, right, to have access to a skilled talent pool, and it builds the resilience both of businesses and the individuals. And I think the new talent models that we see emerging really show how that can work. Take, for example, apprentice swap is what it's called, which we're seeing in France, for example, where it's different businesses are actually sharing a talent pool of apprentices, which provides the workers with a really different set of experiences to work in different industries and to really get access to a broader set of skills. And for employers, it means they have access to a more diverse talent pool that they might not have otherwise if they just build it for themselves. And I think it's these new talent models that really show the importance of collaboration, because in the end it serves everyone, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to sort of close out before we go to Q&A. So for those of you that have questions, be ready. And we've got quite a few questions coming in online, so I will turn to those. But I talked at the start about change. What is the change we all need to be making to ensure this inclusive transition to green jobs? So if you could just pick one change that businesses or governments need to make to ensure this transition, what would it be? Anita, you're looking at me, so I'm starting with you.
Oh, sorry. I thought a lot about this, and stepping, away a bit from what I was saying before. I think it's really they need to act from whatever point of power they have, and with a very, very deep sense of what is it that actually we're trying to achieve in terms of the challenges of inequality and climate change. It can mean different things, but there's got to be a really profound sense of intention that turns into action.
Okay, intention to action. Great. Peter, let me come to you. What would be the one change that businesses or governments should make to ensure this inclusive transition to green jobs?
They should all believe that innovation makes everything possible. It is possible to have people, profit, and planet all win. So it's possible to use innovation to have a win-win-win way.
Excellent. And you are a brilliant example of that, and just so inspirational, actually. I know we've only just scratched the surface of what it is you're doing in Uganda, but you have really been able to balance those three. Karen, over to you.
I think at the risk of repeating myself, I think it's really fostering that transparency about the impact of the green transition on employment and skills, because I think every worker deserves the chance, if we're talking about a just transition, right? They deserve the chance to not just be defenselessly at the mercy of the transition, but really own their own skill set and career prospects. So transparency for me.
Okay, great. Laura, final word.
So I think it actually has to be that they show leadership. There was a Greenpeace survey published, I think, on Monday, showing that most people think climate is one of the most important things affecting us today, but actually they think, they're doing quite well. We're doing things, we're driving less or we're eating less meat. They want governments and business to take leadership. And I think that's absolutely key, because we all need to work together to deliver greener jobs and to address the climate crisis. But actually we do really need businesses and governments to step up and show leadership and example, and sort of through the sorts of things we've been talking about this morning, reskilling people, promoting green jobs and green investment. I think that will show leadership.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to take some of the questions that we've had coming in. And the first one is around gender, which has come up. And Peter, I'm going to come to you on this. Women are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis, we know that. How can we ensure that investments going into green jobs put women at the heart of solutions to climate resilience?
Thank you. The fact is, what we've seen is over half of the rural smallholder farmers are mothers. And as far as any intervention is concerned, as long as there is a robust environmental and social impact assessment done, which involves, proper community engagement, getting the voice of all the communities in there, and making sure that every intervention is, from the onset, looking at an equal percentage of men and women across all age groups, that basically makes a massive difference. Because if the bankability of the project is based on that, it takes ESG, to a whole other level and makes it possible.
And when we spoke the other day, you talked about, because I asked you, how do you make sure that you involve women in the business? And you talked about what you do when you go out to the communities. Maybe you could just touch on that briefly.
Awesome. So I'll give you one example. Every farmers group that we work with is led by both women and men representatives. You've got the same number of representatives on both sides. And secondly, when we look at clean cooking, for example, we don't just take a solution there. We work with them on designing solutions that work for them. It's not just about technologically making sense and economically making sense, but also has to be culturally, relevant. And so those who cook with firewood, we give them an alternative to that, which looks like firewood, but it's made from ag waste. And, we make sure that those who may not have day jobs, but who are homemakers, we make sure that what comes out when they're done cooking, the ash, we buy that back, or we give themselves that give off biochar, we buy that back. They can earn from cooking. So when cooking becomes an earning exercise, it makes a massive, massive difference, especially when the buyer at the other end is a big corporate like Lafarge. So it changes everything from that point as well, especially if that gets sold on as biochar or as biofertilizer as well. There are so many ways of involving the community across the gender divide in the design and implementation of all the projects.
Great, thanks, Peter. Is there anything any of you would like to add, or I'll move to the next question? Laura, you're sort of opening and closing.
I think it's a really good example that Peter's just shared with us, but it is also just some of the basic things about women having access to finance and some of the land tenure, some of the very basic things that from a developing country context we've been trying to address for a very long time. So again, is it the wake up of climate change that actually could spur progress in those areas? Because for a very long time we've been trying to address things like women's economic empowerment. So yes, it's great to be innovative, but also some of the basics need to be addressed.
Great, thank you. And we've got a question which maybe I'll throw at you initially, Anita, but others feel free to chip in, which is from Leonard Cheshire, asking, could any panel member share insights on any particular strategies to engage youth with disabilities in green jobs?
Yeah, lots of things in that question. We're actually, at YBI, we're doing some work with our members right now about the broader inclusivity. And really a process that our members will go through to decide how internally as organizations, but externally in terms of the programs, they can be more inclusive. And so we've been working with organizations that are more specialized in that area than others. Maybe not touching so much on the green, but I think first of all it's making the programming accessible in the variety of ways, and actually understanding that there is a different perspective that can actually be brought to it. And I'll give you, one of my favorite examples from our network is a woman called Marta in Mozambique, who had two twin passions. One was plastic in the ocean, and she had a friend who needed prosthetics. So she's an industrial designer, so she has created a company where she is making prosthetics out of plastic recovered from the ocean. Not a business idea that most people would come up with, but actually, looking at a challenge and finding a solution in a way which brings all those things together. But I think that the starting point is actually to think more broadly that everybody's got something to bring to the table. You need to adapt what you're doing to make sure that they can bring that to the table, and that it's not a limiting factor, it's just a different perspective that is and actually a really healthy different perspective that's being brought to things.
Karen, to address that topic, I think this is really where partnerships come into play. Right? It's first you need to identify the talent. Where is the talent? And then making sure that they have the right skills. So you need to upskill and reskill them. And then particularly upskill and reskill them into existing jobs. You don't just want to upskill and reskill into the void, but actually make sure that the opportunities are there and that the accommodations can be taken there as well. So it's focusing on that talent, but then also creating that enabling environment within the organizations. Because it's not just about bringing, let's say, disabled youth into the workplace, but also making sure that they stay, right? So what is the workplace culture and the accommodations that you need to create there that they can then thrive in that new environment?
Yeah, absolutely. And Peter, I'm going to throw this question to you because I know that you've been working with the refugee community within Uganda. So there's a question specifically around refugees. What are the opportunities and challenges of incorporating refugees into green jobs, economies of host nations? And that's particularly obviously on many people's minds because of the situation in Afghanistan. But it would be great to hear your perspective from within Uganda.
Awesome. I'll start off by saying I myself was a refugee for more than 20 years. And so lived that side of it, and thanks to opportunities, became a rocket scientist and back in Uganda now working in this space. So in Uganda, refugees are given access to land to plant crops. And so if we make sure that they're able to improve the quality of what they're planting, improve the yield, and make sure the value addition gets that crop to the right market, they're not only able to have enough food to feed their families, but also able to have enough of an income to improve the livelihoods of their families. And then when they're able to get access to high-speed internet, refugees that are highly skilled are able to work online globally. So that's something else which makes a massive difference. And then finally, if they have a right to work, that makes a massive difference because that can add to the skills need of whichever country is hosting them. And I'm here today because my parents could work as refugees, and I could work as a refugee as well. And now I'm working with refugees as well. I'm no longer a refugee, but they're just people. They're just people who, just like us, do what we do, know what we know, and just want to make a difference. So let's give them a chance to make a difference.
Absolutely, absolutely. And Anita or anyone else, would you like to comment on the refugee question?
Well, I almost can't add anything to what Peter said, but about half of our members do work with refugees and other migrants. We did some research on that. And of course, it's a very simple title for a broad diversity of people. And generally, you will find that refugees or economic migrants have index higher in terms of people who are bringing business skills into whatever country they've arrived in. And a lot of it is about that right to work, which is basically helping them to regularize so they can just be part of the economy. And then it will be about cultural connections, which is making sure they're supported by people who understand their culture and so forth. And then they have potential. A lot will be highly educated. They will come from all the different sectors around the world. So, in the same way we were talking earlier about, women or people living with disabilities, that's just one dimension of who a person is. They've got a lot of potential.
And I think it's probably talking about green jobs, right? It's a very complex concept. What actually is a green job? And I know there are certain definitions around, but I think we probably need to broaden that definition and talk more about the employment and skills-related aspects of the green transition rather than just green jobs, because I think that then also opens the opportunities again, because there's so many different touch points to the green transition that you don't want to sort of just focus on a tiny sliver of that by talking about green jobs.
Absolutely, and I can't believe how fast the time has gone, so we're pretty much out of time. So, just to bring this to a close and to say that really what we've really just scratched the surface of today, right, is thinking about what are the skills, what are the partnerships that you need in order to ensure an inclusive transition to green jobs. And we know that the context is quite different in different countries, but I know, Peter, you are expanding within Africa. Laura, you've also mentioned about the opportunities to take the solutions from IOD into other countries. So we know that there's a huge opportunity there. We at Accenture are on the start of this journey, and we encourage our clients and our ecosystem partners and our employees to all get engaged. And really, I just want to close out with a comment which I thought was so true from the Director General of the ILO, to say that green jobs will be made decent not by default but by design. And actually, my ask of all of you as we close out today's session is that you really keep that in the top of your minds. How can we design for inclusion through the green transition? So it just leaves me to say a massive thank you. Thank you, first of all, to our panellists, particularly for Peter for joining from Uganda. It was just brilliant to have your perspectives today. We really appreciate it. I know you've got another panel that you're speaking at COP on a number of sessions, and it's really great to have your perspective. And to Anita, Karen and Laura here in the room, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. And finally, a big thank you to our audience, both here in person and also our online community.